In 1927, studio head Louis B. Mayer had a dream to unite the 5 branches of the film industry: actors, directors, producers, technicians, and writers. His dream was to stop them all from unionizing so that he could continue to reap the rewards of their hard work and live the life he had become accustomed to. So he summoned 36 of the most prestigious names of the time to a banquet and explained his plans. And after collecting $100 from each of them, they formed the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. I found that the best way to handle filmmakers was to hang medals all over them. If I got them cups and awards, they'd kill to produce what I wanted, old Louis B. said. And on April 3rd, 1930, at the Coconut Grove at the Ambassador Hotel, the second Academy Awards was held. And today, many, many years later, Moronic Logic is proud to present Golden Boy! Welcome to the second Academy Awards from 1930. Tonight's nominees for Golden Boy: Alibi by Roland West, In Old Arizona by Irving Cummings, The Patriot by Ernst Lubitsch, The Hollywood Review by Charles Reisner, and The Broadway Melody by Harry Beaumont. Welcome to the second Academy Awards from 1930 and Golden Boy, Episode 2. Not to be confused with the third Academy Awards, which was also held in 1930. They were still trying to figure things out. I'm your host, Kenny. You might know me from Episode 1 of Golden Boy. It premiered a month ago. You might also know me from the Hitchcock Challenge podcast and Presenting Alfred Hitchcock, the YouTube show. Hit the like button, smash the subscribe button. And all of those things, they help us. That show, the Hitchcock Show, we do deep dives into Alfred Hitchcock movies in chronological order. We started with The Pleasure Garden in Episode 1, and we're about 5 movies in right now. But they're very deep dives. We read books on this stuff. We're doing a lot of research. We're trying to put a ton of information into one episode. This show, not so much. This show is more about watching the movies and deciding, are they still any good? Do we like them? What should have won the Golden Boy that year? They weren't calling them Oscars yet at this point. That's notable. That comes later. So, and also this show, I choose one of my friends, one fan. We have one fan. We do have one dedicated fan to this show. They send me about 20 emails a day, and they are creepy. But we take what we can get on this show. So that is not the person who is co-hosting this time. Oh, I also want to thank our executive producer, Jessa Goldstein, who does many of the watching of these movies to let me know ahead of time if I'm going to like them or not. And then I watch them, and then I decide if I agree with her. I also like to thank Sam and Lance from the Hitchcock Show. They were some of the original idea men behind this show. By idea men, I mean we talked about it in a bar a bunch of times. And I would like to thank this week's guest, our second guest on Golden Boy. I might know him from, and actually I messed this up last time. Cyrus was really upset when I said I might know him. So I did write down how I know him. Let me look here. Our next guest I know from kindergarten. That's what I wrote down. We also co-wrote and co-directed a hit play in high school that was banned and canceled the day before. And we did the next year, and then it was a hit. And we've also had many, many other numerous misadventures, many too numerous to mention here for this podcast. He holds a PhD in American Studies, teaches courses in cinema, literature, and pop culture. I'd like to welcome Robert William Albanese III. I call him Rob.
Penny, thanks for having me. Appreciate the intro. I am a reformed academic, and as a professor of mine once referred to himself, a competent dilettante, which means he could say a little bit about a lot of things, but not a lot about anything focused. And I was like, yeah, I'll put that on my LinkedIn. Sounds good. That'll get me jobs.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
You also have a photographic memory. I think this is important because
Yes.
you're going to remember these movies for the rest of your life.
I might delete them right after this.
Like an eternal sunshine of the spotless mind type of a situation.
Yes, yes. Like I'm like gonna see if I can do like some sort of Black Mirror, just like offloading that to a server somewhere else, so I don't have to have it.
Yeah, it's the second Academy Awards was a little rough. They were, as I said in the preamble, they were figuring things out a little bit. One thing, well, let me ask you this, Rob, since we did the same schooling together, what do you know about the year 1930? What was happening in the world when this Oscars was done?
Well, I think in the US, the biggest thing is the Great Depression. We are a year removed from the stock market crash and in the early throes of the Depression. I think that is relevant to a couple of the films that we'll talk about specifically. So we have one musical, and then we have another that is all musical, not even narrative, which I don't know if that is ever repeated in subsequent Oscars. But given the musical genre's connection to the Depression, issues of poverty, musical numbers as a way of like kind of almost like wish fulfillment expression. I don't know how much it directly ties to some of the two musicals that we'll watch, but there are some connections. But that's the biggest, I think, touchstone or historical touch point to these films. What about you, Kenny?
Yeah, I think one thing that's interesting is about musicals at this time is I'd read, because their sound is like this struggling new medium. Musicals are easier to do because you didn't have to match the sound to the lips necessarily. So they could record these songs and like these kind of big, crazy numbers. And it was a little easier to make it look like it was happening within the movie. Also, it's like, hey, we can do sound now. Let's just put every sound we can make on the screen, that in itself was a sort of a reason why you would go to the movies.
Yeah, I think that's majorly significant in this batch of films. First Oscars, what you and Cyrus discussed last week, not last week, last episode, feels like last week. The majority of those films were silent films. Was there a sound film in the batch? I feel like
no, there were no sound films. What? Jazz Singer. We did the Jazz Singer.
Yes,
it wasn't nominated. It got its own. It just was given an Oscar because it was the first sound film, and the first. It wasn't even the first. These are all technicalities. It did really well at the box office. So, well, if you think of the first sound film, people at the time would have thought the Jazz Singer because that's the movie they all saw at the movie theater and were like, "Wow," not a good movie. If you want,
no. But I think that some of the conversation that you and Cyrus had about the Jazz Singer is going to figure into at least into my thoughts about one of the films that we watched for this week.
There's some ugly through lines that are coming through. I know what you're talking about. Maybe I'll save it for when we get there, but I know exactly what you're talking about. And I think one of the other major through lines, which is why we include Coquette into this episode, why there's going to be a discussion on that other movie, is sort of this idea of the fix at the Oscars, like that movies have been fixed or that there's and one thing I want to point out straight off the bat is that first Oscars, I'm positive that almost that entire show was fixed. Like those were you had 36 people, you had 6 judges in the room. They're all from each studio. And they're basically picking, okay, your movie's going to win this, your movie's going to win this. And we know for sure that Louis B. Mayer came in and denied the crowd a win for Best Unique Artistic Picture and gave it to Sunrise. This Oscars, it's funny because the movie that wins is Broadway Melody, Louis B. Mayer's movie. He didn't win it, the last one. You feel like, oh, okay, well, now it's my turn to win. You start to see Mary Pickford winning Coquette isn't the only questionable win, I think, at this Oscars, as we talk about these movies. And I think the idea that this is like, everyone in the country came together and was like, the Broadway Melody was the best movie of the year, that's kind of something, put a squash on it. This was picked by the people who made these movies.
Right. And I think one thing, I know we're going to bash movies that were made in 1930, and one of the things that don't want to present is some idea that, old movies bad.
Mhm.
Some of this is about this Oscars is the celebration of an immature medium of the sound film. And some of it is people throwing whatever they could against the wall and seeing what would stick. And some of it is just, limitations of the technology. But the technology at the time was impressive enough that it wasn't seen as limitation. It was seen as innovation. Two of the greatest silent films, most celebrated silent films ever made are right around this time as well. The Man with a Movie Camera by Ziga Vertov and Un Chien Andalou by Louis Buñuel.
Yeah.
And they're stunning films. I mean, they are not American films, so they would not be eligible for the Academy Award. But I just kind of want to establish that in the background, that there are some amazing aesthetic and narrative things happening in cinema still at this time, while we are focusing on films that are not aesthetically amazing.
Yeah. I want to let me back you up on that too, because I just watched Un Chien Andalou like a few days ago. Yeah, excellent, great, like something like out of a David Lynch. You could see David Lynch watching that and being like, this is some inspiration for him in making his movies now. And the other movie I watched like a week ago was The Passion of Joan of Arc. Holy crap! This movie, if it came out in America, probably could have been nominated for this Academy Awards. It's 1929. It could be an A24 masterpiece if it came out today. I just thought it was awesome. So, and The Crowd last week, The Crowd, my Letterboxd review for The Crowd is 5 stars. I thought that was actually a fantastic movie. Highly recommended. We're not going to get any spoiler alert, guys. Ladies, everybody listening, there's no 5-star movies this time. I don't, at least for me. There might be a 4.
There are not any 5-star movies here for me as well.
Okay. Yeah, it's a tough crowd. It's a tough
clear. It's a tough batch.
Tough batch.
All right.
But yeah, Rob, that was a good point about the depressions going on. So also I was thinking World War II was going on around this time. Do you know what were the years on that?
Right. Begins in 1939, ends in 1945. The United States enters in at the beginning of 1942, right after the invasion of the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Things overseas in Europe are
tense.
Are tense and are about to change a lot.
Yeah. So we're in the pre-war. Speaking of we're in the pre-code era. So a lot of these movies are pre-code that we're going to be talking about, which basically just means things like women who are like sleeping with multiple men, kind of that type of thing. Sleeping with people outside of wedlock. There's a ton of weird arcane rules that Hollywood came up with in like the 1932 to 1934. I think by 34 they were enforcing them a bit more. This Hollywood version of life sort of started to become the norm of like these romances and things that us people on the street were not actually experiencing.
Right. And one thing is, that looking at it from through a 2023 lens, it's hard to even register what about these films would have been obscene or offensive. Like nothing about these seems offensive, but we do have one that was subject to a ban in at least one major metropolitan area.
Oh, yes, this is true. All right, before we get into this movie, I do have one other question for you, and it's the question I ask of all my guests, and that is, have you seen the movie Babylon?
I have not seen Babylon. I have seen the first hour of Babylon. It is one of the very few films that I have walked out of a theater on. I do want to watch it again in its entirety, but not in a theater, not all at once. I don't know. I just felt like my life was a little too short for 3 hours of Babylon in a dark room.
Yeah, I gave it 2.5 stars on Letterboxd, but last episode I kept bringing it up, and this episode I'm going to be bringing it up a few times just because we're in that actual era from that movie. Sure. Yeah, I wanted to. A lot of people walked out of that movie in the theater I was in that first hour, which was like just aggressively antagonistic towards the audience. It starts with an elephant like pooping on a guy, and that's me putting it as basic as possible.
And that might be the only interesting thing that happens in the first hour.
Yeah, it's a lot of the camera swinging around. You're watching a lot of debauchery. Every like scandalous thing from this time period seems to be happening at this one party. Everything that was ever in the news, I think Fatty Arbuckle kills a prostitute and pees on her. Like everything he's ever done happened in that first scene. Allegedly done. I think he was found innocent. Anyways, let's talk movies.
Yes, let's do it.
Share screen.
The Patriot, which is directed by Ernst Lubitsch, as you see in the poster. Lubitsch, unlike the majority of the filmmakers that we'll see here, is a celebrated figure in the history of cinema, and his career spans well from the silent era to the sound era. I think he's most well-known and revered for sound films and doing particularly comedies of manners, for which the phrase "the Lubitsch touch," and I hope I'm not butchering the pronunciation of his last name, that phrase was coined as a way of describing a film with style and elegance and a certain cutting way of looking at the affluent classes. This film, from the 3-minute trailer that people can watch, does not seem to have the Lubitsch touch or an interest in it. And yes, this film is lost to history with the exception of a trailer that you can see on YouTube and 1/3 of the film that you can see if you want to go to the University of California, Los Angeles's film archives, and I'm sure jump through several hoops to actually be able to watch the print. And so Kenny, you and I have talked about this a lot.
Yeah.
What we're going to be dealing with here is 4 films that, again, spoilers, none of us liked. Neither of us liked the films that we can talk about in their entirety.
They have challenges.
They all have challenges, yes. Are they challenged enough that we would rather give the Golden Boy to a film that we not only haven't seen, but cannot see, because the 3 minutes of footage that we have readily available is better composed and has the imprimatur of a well-known, well-regarded filmmaker.
Yeah, this is going to be I don't know if it's a Rubicon or what. We definitely have to cross some moral ground here in our choices. I'm interested in what yours is at the end. Just for the folks at home, if me and my co-host don't agree on the Golden Boy, they both get the Golden Boy. So both movies will get the Golden Boy. We don't have to agree. And I feel like This is one of the toughest ones where us agreeing is going, like, as you said, we're either picking a movie that's sort of the best of the worst, or we're just like, I cannot support these 4. I'm going to pick a lost movie. And
right. Are we going to pick Schrodinger's cat, basically?
Yeah, it's a movie that's here, but not here. It's nominated for Best Picture, so we have the ability to pick it, but we can't see it. I would like to, following up on what you just said, and something I talked about with Cyrus last time was like, what makes for a Best Picture? Like when you are thinking about Best Pictures and you're like, well, what are some of the movies I really like? One of the things I landed on, and I'll let you give me your point of view in a sec, is a lot of times it comes down to like directors. It's directors, it's auteurs. I love the Stanley Kubricks of the world. I love the Wes Andersons of the world, and I go into their movies. Every one of their movies might not be my favorite, but they're all good. One thing I would say about The Patriot, and from all of these movies and doing a little research in these directors, is Ernst Lubitsch probably can be considered an auteur director. A lot of other directors respect him. I haven't seen any of his other movies to compare, but he's been nominated multiple times for Academy Awards. He's going to be at future Academy Awards, some of his movies. Mm-hmm. So whereas some of these other fellas that we're going to be talking about were either, peaked with the movie we're going to be talking about or not. For me, that's another moral quandary in picking this movie. Ernst Lubitsch might be the type of director I like. I don't know. I haven't seen the movie, but... So I know. What about you, Rob? Best Picture. What springs to mind when you're thinking Best Pictures?
I mean, for me, I'm going to look at artistic vision as sort of a cohesive artistic vision. I have my own biases. I skew dark. I'm certainly more likely to support. I'm trying to remember. Get Out was the same year as Green Book. I believe it was. I know that you will cut in some fact checking at this point.
Golden Boy fact checkers, assemble! Get Out by Jordan Peele was nominated in 2018 for Best Picture, but lost to The Shape of Water by Guillermo del Toro. Green Book by Peter Farrelly won Best Picture in 2019 in an upset, beating out the likes of Spike Lee's BlacKkKlansman and Roma by Alfonso Cuarón. So close enough. Back to you, Rob.
But I'm more likely to support Get Out than Green Book. I was much more excited for Parasite and Moonlight to win, because I do, those films had really incisive commentaries and beautifully developed characters, and their directors had a clear, admirable vision.
Yeah, Triangle of Sadness was a movie you really liked, right? That was another kind of...
Yeah, I loved Triangle of Sadness, and I think that I was on board with Everything Everywhere All at Once, which is an entirely wholly original film, and I think that's a huge point as well. Something that's original, something that we haven't seen before.
The Patriot, based on what I've read of the plot, which let me just give for the people at home, yes, so they don't have to go to Wikipedia. We do that for you on Golden Boy. We go right to Wikipedia and we tell you what the synopsis of this movie is. In 18th century Russia, the Tsar, Paul, is surrounded by murderous plots and trusts only Count Palin. Count Palin, we should mention, was nominated for Best Actor for this movie. Another ding for the Patriot. Mm-hmm. Palin wishes to protect his friend, the Mad King, but because of the horror of the king's acts, he feels that he must remove him from the throne. These Wikipedia things can go on, so we're just going to skip a little down here. Countess Osterman apparently is Palin's mistress, and she lures the Tsar into a bedroom where she tells him of this plot to overthrow him. Countess Osterman was played by Florence Vidor, who is King Vidor's ex-wife. That might be an interesting fact to people. I should also point out that Emil Jannings as Tsar Paul I kind of feels like, who's that Werner Herzog actor from Aguirre?
Klaus Kinski.
Yeah, I feel like he's like in the Klaus Kinski. Like, this guy is in real life not a good guy. Like, he became a Nazi later on. He made movies with Nazi Germany. A lot of it because he had a thick German accent, so Hollywood kind of casts him out when the sound era starts. This guy feels like a guy who dominates a room. Like, he walks in, you don't get in his sight lines, This is going to come up again as we talk about sound cinema, silent cinema, acting styles, particularly with Coquette. Oh, yeah. All right, let me get on to that. I'll just finish on the movie. Basically, Palin turns on his buddy. Palin turns on the Tsar. And then Palin gets turned on, and as he's dying on the floor, he says, "I have been a bad friend and lover, but I've been a patriot." I don't know, man. The hairs on my arms are just standing up reading that Wikipedia article. I think, I do wish we could actually talk about this movie and like that we had seen it.
We can, for better, but mostly for worse, project our own ideas onto this film based on the 3 minutes that I was able to see, understanding that we're still working within a mature medium, that there's an actual regard for shot composition, light and shadow, some things that, though another film will have in common, but some of the chiaroscuro lighting that you see in German Expressionism is in here. And it's very easy to take what I like about silent cinema and also the visual aesthetics that have carried over all the way from there into contemporary cinema, into noir, just extrapolate that this would be a better film than the others.
And you had mentioned the Lubitsch touch earlier, and like in reading on that a little bit, like there's a lot of people who defined it a little differently. It's something a lot of directors and people talked about, but it generally meant something like he would elevate material, and he was known for doing comedy in serious movies, which is something else I love. So That's, again, another ding for this movie. I also think it's worth mentioning that this was a silent movie, that The Patriot was the last actual silent movie nominated for Best Picture. They added some sound and effects like at the last minute, like when they were pushing this in the theaters and they were like, hey, we got to do something quick. But as I mentioned, like what's his name? Jannings had a thick act. They couldn't even use his voice for the movie. It's also basically worth noting Hans Kraly, who wrote the movie, won the Academy Award for this movie. Art direction, Hans Dreyer. He was nominated for this movie. He was nominated 22 times in his career. He won 3 Oscars. So you got a serious art director on this. Lewis Stone, we said, was nominated for Best Actor. Rob, I hate besmirching people that are long gone, but I read a great story about Lewis Stone from The Patriot that it's not a great story. It's a sad story, but he died chasing kids. He was 74. and some kids were throwing rocks at his garage and trampling on his garden, and he chased them down the street and had a heart attack.
And he was not in Babylon.
Did that happen in Babylon?
I'm kidding. I remember. I didn't see it. I just know it's where.
And by the way, they did that exact scene in Babylon. No, they didn't. They didn't do that.
As you were going through the nominations for this film, I wanted to mention that one of the distinctions that the 1930 Academy Awards has is that it is the only Academy Awards where not a single film won more than one award.
That's Rob, actually super good point. I didn't even bring that up at the beginning. This is the only Academy Award where the nominees weren't even told ahead of time. We only know that these are the 5 movies because the Academy went back and checked the notes of the original judges and saw that these were the movies they were discussing. So like at the time, these people didn't know, which is going to play into the next movie we talk about, Coquette, why Mary Pickford, being one of the judges, kind of knew she was nominated for this role. I also want to point out the Patriot was put out by Paramount Pictures, and the Broadway melody was done by Louis B. Mayer's, is it MGM?
Mm-hmm.
Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. So
yes.
When we start talking about which we're about to get to, the Mary Pickford scandal, I want to keep people in mind that Louis B. Mayer, who fixed the first one, his movie wins the second one. You know, he fixed the first one so a competitor could win. You kind of think we're at the second one. Maybe he's thinking, hey, my movie should win this time. That's just me not reading anything, just knowing how people work, guessing.
Kenny, I want to ask you a question. We don't have to go on too long about it now because it's probably just one that's going to float over the proceedings.
Yeah.
Where do you fall on the can we give a film that we've only seen 3 minutes of, The Golden Boy?
I'm challenged, man. I didn't rule it out. I'll just say that. I didn't rule it out.
Okay. It's a question that's going to hover over. So I was curious about how you felt about it as we start diving into other films. You want to jump to Coquette?
Let's jump to Coquette. We're not including this for a Golden Boy Best Picture. We're only talking about this because Mary Pickford, one of the judges, one of the 6 judges. Let me read the scandal to people just so, and then you can comment on it. And then I want to ask you, Rob, what makes for a best performance in a movie? Okay, this is by Damien Bona, and he wrote this in the New York Times. The Academy Awards were just a year old when Mary Pickford decided she should have a little gold statuette. Anticipation had been high for Coquette because it was Pickford's initial talking picture and presented her in an adult role for the first time. Pickford had cut off her trademark curls, which were then sent to Southern California museums. Neither the melodrama nor Pickford's performance was well received. But Pickford was too cagey to let negative notices get in the way. At the time, Academy Awards winners were chosen by the 5-member board of judges, and Pickford had the quintet over for tea. An invitation to Pickfair, the estate she shared with her husband, Douglas Fairbanks, was the greatest status symbol in Hollywood, and the committee was duly appreciative, naming Pickford Best Actress at the 1928-29 Awards held in 1930. Protests over this blatant bribery led to the opening of balloting to all Academy members. Voters could still be bought off, but it would take a much greater effort because of more people voting. That's the scandal we're talking about. Rob.
Yes.
Talk about what you think of when you think of a best performance, please. And then kind of you can segue that into what you think about Mary Pickford and Coquette.
I would like to say something about Mary Pickford and Coquette before I answer that, just as a way of framing certain things about my answer for a best performance. Pickford, we're catching her in the transition from being a silent film actor to a sound film actor, and some of the things that emerge stylistically and some of the ways that she has a challenge transitioning between the two. And some of it has to do with realism. I don't think that a performance needs to be realistic. A heavily stylized performance is absolutely fine. It's one of the reasons why in best supporting categories in particular, I kind of wince at the fact that of so many performances that are nominated for best actor, best actress, so on, are historical figures. And what we laud the performer for is their ability to inhabit this historical figure. That becomes an especially impressive feat. Yeah, I don't look for realism. I think that looking for realism in performance or anything about cinema is a mistake. I believe that Hitchcock, in fact, at some point in his career said, if what you are, I'll paraphrase, if what you are looking for in cinema is realism, then maybe you're just in the wrong seat. You should disengage from the medium altogether. I think that goes for performance like anything else.
Love the Hitchcock quotes. Keep them coming. That's great, Rob.
Yeah. I don't have many.
Still, just carrying one around though in your pocket is I appreciate that in my heart. Yes, it's important to think of Mary Pickford too, is just before you kind of dissect your performance here, that this was the first major movie star of Hollywood. Mary Pickford was known throughout the world. She was the first. I read she was the first millionaire, so like female millionaire in the country at the time. It was unbelievable.
Okay.
She took control of her finances. She took control of, like, she had a head for money and for getting the perfect deal. I watched her in one of her early movies, Sparrows, and where she was like 32 playing a 16-year-old. And every time she's on screen, she's compelling, like a silent movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I totally get why audiences loved her.
And why D.W. Griffith, one of the absolute most celebrated, if somewhat complicatedly celebrated silent film directors, the auteur behind some of the most important films made in the silent era, why Mary Pickford was his go-to. His DiCaprio or Scorsese, DiCaprio or De Niro for Scorsese.
That's a perfect comparison. I mean,
yeah, just they are kind of wedded at the hip. She's pivotal to his success and vice versa.
Yeah. So Coquette, what did you think of her performance then? So we got Mary Pickford in the sound era. What do you think of a sound era, not playing a child, Mary Pickford?
The first thing that I wrote down was YOLO, her bringing what seemed like the tools of the trade of the silent era, the silent performance, the animation of her physical self, having to convey emotion and character and drive a narrative through body language, facial expressiveness, how what works and is important for silent film performance comes off as just so overinflated and melodramatic, histrionic. She just seems awful. She seems like a really, really bad actor.
I felt like this movie was so bad too that, like, in some senses, I felt like she was trying to make something out of nothing. Like, she was way overacting for scenes that didn't really call for it, but she was like, I want to show my range. But like, the movie was like, yeah, that's not that kind of a movie though. Like, I couldn't stand it. I think I wrote down in my review of Coquette that it was like Reefer Madness, but for women basically having multiple boyfriends. It was like, don't have more than one suitor, or your father might murder one of them and then he'll murder himself in jail and it'll all be your fault. It's my takeaway from Coquette.
Yes. And one of the things that we should note, and I watched it on YouTube. I'm guessing that you probably did the same. And
yeah, either YouTube or the Internet Archive. Those are the go-to for these movies.
It is garbled sound on top of terrible performing in service of a bad story.
All right. Well, we're not going to belabor the Coquette anymore since it's not one, but I echo your sentiments that I think we are dealing with a superstar actress who was struggling in a new medium and struggling, probably trying to get a different type of performance that she was seeing being done elsewhere. And this was just not the movie for it. And it kind of just spectacularly flopped.
Right. And her film credits going forward are few and far between. I mean, it seems fair to say that the advent of sound film, it functionally ended Mary Pickford's career as a working actor.
Well, let's transfer this to the Broadway Melody. And the reason I want to talk about that one next with you is because Bessie Love, the actress in this movie, was also nominated for Best Actress. So while we talk about this movie, we can kind of at least because there were four other actresses, I think 4 or 5 nominated, and we didn't see those movies, but we did see this one, so we can at least compare Bessie Love to Mary Pickford when as we discuss this movie. Let me read my Wikipedia for you folks at home, and then I'll kick it to you, Rob. The Broadway Melody, also known as the Broadway Melody of 1929, and this is because apparently they just kept making Broadway melodies. This was just, they did like this one in 36. I think there's one in 40.
This happens with musicals at that time.
They just keep doing them. It's a pre-code musical film. Oh, it was one of the first early musicals to feature a Technicolor sequence, and that's something this movie didn't have. It's lost, but when we talk Hollywood Review, there's Technicolor in that. So if you're an audience member going to see this movie and that movie, not only are you getting sound, you're getting color. So that's almost another double win. And again, we need to remember that sound and color doesn't mean it's a good movie. Just like with The Jazz Singer, sound didn't mean a good movie. So here's the plot. Eddie Kearns sings the Broadway melody and tells some chorus girls that he has brought the Mahoney Sisters vaudeville act to New York to perform it with him. Harriet, Hank Mahoney, and their sister Queenie Mahoney are awaiting Eddie's arrival in their apartment. Hank, I should mention, I didn't realize that was a female name when I was doing this, but however, I loved it so much that we just bought 2 kittens, and we named one of our kittens Hank after Hank Mahoney from the Broadway Melody. So Hank and Zelda, for those of you at home, for actually that one fan that sends me all these emails and wants to, I'll send you some pictures of her, of the 2 cats. Nearly everyone is captivated, though, by Queenie, Hank's younger sister, particularly notorious playboy Jacques Warriner. While Jacques begins to woo Queenie, Hank is upset that Queenie's building her success on her looks rather than her talent. Eddie has a big old crush on her, too. We should mention that. And look, at the end of the movie, Eddie, Hank's boyfriend, dumps her for her younger sister, who he creeps on the entire movie. And it's really, to me, really disturbing. About sum it up.
Kenny, where do you want me to start with the comparison of Pickford and Bessie Love, or should we start with how completely alarming
Let's start with the strength. Let's start with the strength, because I feel like I know what you're going to say I about Bessie Love. So why don't we start with the strength of this movie? So Rob.
Okay. I started this exercise by watching the Academy Award winner. I wanted to understand where the bar was set with this collection of films, and then look back and see where the mistakes were relative to like awarding the Broadway Melody Best Picture. And I think I said to you in a text as we're starting down this road that Bessie Love was the only good thing about this film. She seemed like a person. She seemed like a person who exists on planet Earth and has some sort of range and depth that is able to convey emotion. We'll see in the Hollywood Review that she is a comic performer, and here she is part of a vaudeville act, being brought into this musical. But she's able to do comedy, she's able to do drama, even understanding that we're being positioned to admire Anita Page more. She's the female lead. Bessie Love's performance definitely transcended that and transcended whatever star-making machinations were behind the Broadway Melody. How about you?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, we're looking at the poster here, and it says with Charles King, Anita Page, Bessie Love's listed third. Watching this movie, I just assumed Bessie Love at first was the lead of the movie. Every scene she's in, she steals. Queenie, Anita Page, nothing against her, but like I don't really remember much about what she did other than like be lusted after by every man in the movie. Bessie Love is like, she's got this quick dialogue, like she delivers her lines like really forcefully and great, just a well lived in character. Like, and I immediately was like sympathetic with her. I'm like, she is awesome. Like this, her arc in this movie is terrible. It's terrible. And the movie wants you to root for the worst possible thing. The movie doesn't even acknowledge that. The movie is just like, oh no, we want Eddie, Hank's boyfriend, to fall in love with her younger sister. Like that's the love story that the audiences are clamoring for. And I'm like, what audience? Like that's horrible and gross.
I really wonder what if there was sort of like the IMDb Rotten Tomatoes user reviews of this film at that moment in time, how many might actually say, hey, are we rooting for this man to fall in love with his fiance's sister and have that be a positive outcome? It was really gross. It was really gross seeing that. And to even know it from the very beginning, I was struck when Eddie sees Queenie for the first time after however many years. There is a shot that's sort of like a classic silent film shot, or like star-making close-up of Queenie, soft lens. She's framed by soft light. It reminded me of, this is going into some like film theory 101 stuff, but Laura Mulvey, who wrote the essay Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema, talks about the male gaze, this idea that is now like completely circulated through culture. The idea of, when you were watching popular narrative cinema, or most, that you were placed in the subject position of the protagonist, the male protagonist, and that the way that we look at women on screen is implicitly the way that he looks at women on screen. And so we are being sort of like sutured into desiring her the way that he was, and thus rooting for that. And to see Bessie Love's performance as the superior of the two is actually working outside of what Harry Beaumont and all the other producers, writers of this film want us to support.
Rob, I love it. This is why having someone with a PhD on this show really elevates our material. So we're not just, I liked our accent. This is good material, Rob.
I don't find anything remarkable about Anita Page's performance. I did read somewhere in the contemporary reviews that people who saw the film and critics of it, they definitely found her performance favorable. Her arc is also really boring. I thought that I was being thrown into a Theodore Dreiser novel, that we were going to watch her be corrupted by wealth, and whether it was going to be Eddie or Hank, we're going to become further mired in poverty as we kept careening towards the Great Depression. That ultimately what we were looking at was her betrayal of the people who cared about her and her family, and this other person who pined over her.
So before we finish our takedown of this movie, why don't we take a Golden Boy break? Bessie Love, Mary Pickford. Who's getting the Golden Boy?
Bessie Love, no question.
Bessie Love, hands down. And the Golden Boy goes to Bessie Love for playing Harriet Hank Mahoney. Yep, these awards were fixed.
They made the right choice.
We made the right choice. Oscars made the wrong choice.
Kenny, what did you think of the musical numbers?
Compared to Hollywood Review, this was worse. There were like 3 or 4 songs, and they just kept playing them over and over and over again, and they weren't even memorable. Like, you leave the movie, I don't remember how the Broadway melody went. He sings at the beginning. They play it like 2 or 3 more times. No earworm at all. Compared to, we're going to talk about Hollywood Review, you get Singing in the Rain, which is now featured in like many movies afterwards.
We're about a year away from Busby Berkeley's first work as a choreographer in cinema. And what I'm most familiar with Busby Berkeley was the work. It's one of the films that I watched in like film history, 200, as The Gold Diggers of 1933. And this is another one of these musicals that becomes a series of musicals. And his musical numbers are so lavish. I think you can fairly credit Berkeley with translating musical theater to cinema and actually like taking advantage of the dynamism of the camera and bringing it to the medium. And that's not what the Broadway melody does. And it's not what the Hollywood Review does. We're not there at the point where a musical can actually, you can see how cinema activates it. For anybody who has seen The Big Lebowski, by the way, and is not familiar with Busby Berkeley, the musical number that occurs in that dream sequence with the dude, "What condition my condition is in" sequence, that's a direct homage to Busby Berkeley. The Coen brothers have said as much.
Oh, that's great. What's the movie you recommend? The third 1933 movie?
Watch The Gold Diggers of 1933, which is also more overtly about the Great Depression.
I'm writing this down, even though I'm going to edit this later and hear you say it about 70,000 times before our fans do. Our fan. But yeah, okay. No, that's before we move on to, but Bessie Love, it is worth pointing out though that this movie, although the fate of her character is not good in it, in real life, well, it earned her a nomination for Best Actress, but also the success gave her a 5-year contract with MGM, where her salary went from $500 to $3,000, which is the equivalent of $51,000 in 2022, and that was $1,000 more than her co-star Eddie. So actually making more money than the male lead of this movie. So.
Well, and she continues working for a much longer period of time than her contemporaries here. She was in D.W. Griffith's Intolerance, but she's in The Hunger, the film that Tony Scott directed about vampires that features David Bowie. I think that is her last film in 1983.
Oh wow, what a career.
Right. She was a bit player in it, but she is, she remains a working actor.
A rare good story. A lot of these actors we get, they fall on their lawn chasing kids. Before we move to the next one, I just want to point out, because talking about auteur directors, the director of this movie was Harry Beaumont. He was also nominated for Best Director. He was an American film director, actor, and screenwriter. There was something interesting about him. No, there wasn't. The Broadway Melody was the pinnacle of his career. He continued directing mainly at MGM into the 1940s, but none of his subsequent films rose above the B level, whatever that means. When we think of an auteur director, if you're the type of person who thinks that Harry Beaumont is, then this is his best movie. So this is what we got to work with Harry Beaumont. So again, just something to think about.
Well, and this is also where we are, the specter of the Patriot hanging over the other films. What we know about Ernst Lubitsch and his career and the success and the influence.
Something to think about. Just Hollywood Review from 1929. What's interesting about this movie is I saw this before Broadway Melody, so I'm very confused when they're talking about the Broadway Melody in it. When they're like, "Oh, now we got Bessie Love singing their song from the Broadway Melody." I'm like, the other movie that's also nominated. When in Oscar history has a movie talked about one of the competitor movies, like in Everything Everywhere All at Once, if they were just suddenly in Top Gun Maverick in one of their realities? What a weird crossover. Hollywood Review was a pre-code musical comedy film released by MGM, studio's second feature-length musical and one of their earliest sound films. It has 3 segments in Technicolor. Unlike MGM's imposing feature films, which always boasted strong story values, the Hollywood Review of 1929 was a plotless parade of variety acts. Billed as an all-star musical extravaganza, the film includes performances by once and future stars, including Joan Crawford singing and dancing on stage. Other segments feature Lionel Barrymore, Buster Keaton, Bessie Love, and Anita Page. Highlights of the film are a comedy, we'll decide on this, comedy routine starring Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy as this is one of their earliest, if not their first, sound appearance. Laurel and Hardy, as Cyrus mentioned in the last episode, he prefers them to Charlie Chaplin. I got some questions on that one. I'm not sure I agree with him. One of these musical performances that of note is the debut of Singing in the Rain, performed by Cliff Edwards as Ukulele Ike, and later performed at the end of the film by the entire cast. The latter all-star color sequence was a last-minute addition to the film, shot late at night on June 10th, just 10 days before the premiere at Grauman's Chinese Theater. Only 3 MGM stars were not in the review. So basically, they got everyone on the lot, and they were like, we're doing this. Rob, what do you think? What are the odds you're going to choose this as Best Picture? Don't spoil, but give us some gambling odds. Are we talking...
really, really long odds.
Okay.
It's incredibly long odds.
Take those odds at this Oscars.
It is hard to even compare the Hollywood Review to the other films in that, yes, it's not narrative. It's a non-narrative film. It is a well-edited videotaping of a high school variety show.
I wrote that down. High school talent show. Because the
Yes,
camera work
it's
is basically it's almost it's just like they just put it on a tripod and we're like, here we go.
and there's something interesting about that, just as far as like the advent of sound cinema. But Kenny, did you watch this in one sitting? Because I don't know if there was a rule that we're supposed to watch these in one sitting, but I did not watch this in one sitting.
No, you can watch it in any manner as long as you watch it.
Well, I watched it in several sittings.
I don't blame you on that. I did watch it in one sitting, and it was a painful sitting. There's a lot in this to break down, and we could be here all night talking about it. What's a standout? What was a good segment? What was something you liked, or something you feel is worth talking about?
Joan Crawford's performance is interesting as a curiosity. She does have a star power that you can understand would propel a very successful career. Joan Crawford does not seem at this point like the person who would star in Mildred Pierce, but she's got a magnetism about her. I thought that the Romeo and Juliet bit, the color piece of it was kind of interesting. Thought that the singing, maybe it's just because Singing in the Rain is a great song. I liked that okay. But beyond that, and just sort of thinking of this film as a celebration of the technology more than anything else, I can't recommend anything. I'm interested to hear your Laurel and Hardy and Buster Keaton thoughts that you had queued up a little bit earlier.
All I'm going to say on Buster Keaton is it's an embarrassment for him to have been in this movie. If he, I watched the Steamboat movie recently.
Yes.
I thought that movie was fantastic, and he's really great in it. And I haven't seen a ton of Buster Keaton movies, but I really do appreciate him as an actor. And this is it was an embarrassment. Like, he does this improvised dance that is just not funny.
It's really bad.
It was bad. Laurel and Hardy, I feel like they're doing their shtick, and it just, for me, was not funny. So here are the things I liked in the Hollywood Review. Two things. I liked Singing in the Rain. I think, like you said, is just like a classic. Like, it's amazing that these people heard this song for the first time. And for me, the first time I think I saw it in a movie was probably in A Clockwork Orange, because I didn't watch Singing in the Rain until much later, that movie.
Yes.
So I'm coming from a spot where, at the time watching Clockwork Orange, I'm like, oh, I love this movie. And I love Singing in the Rain in that movie, the use of it. So like, I'm already partial to that song. That's a song that, that gets in your head, and I'm fine with it being in my head. What's interesting about the second performance of Singing in the Rain in this movie is in the movie Babylon, they totally redo that scene where you see all of the Brad Pitt and all of the actors, Margot Robbie, they all have to wear those same raincoats and perform this ridiculous scene. And it's funny reading that was thrown together at the last minute, because I feel like the reality is probably exactly the way it is in Babylon, where they were like, we need you guys all at the set. We're doing a thing today. And they're all like, I don't want to be in it. And they're like, here's your raincoat. And you're like, what are we singing? And, and Buster Keaton's there. And they're like, oh, Lon Chaney was one of the guys who wasn't there. And I just think it's funny that he's probably just like, yeah, no, I will not be doing that.
The Lon Chaney bit is marginally funny,
where they're like all dressed as like monsters, and they're singing about how Lon Chaney what was it?
Isn't real. It's like Lon Chaney isn't real.
Oh yeah,
he appears and he's real. It's like, oh no, Lon Chaney isn't an actual person. He's not here to scare you, but he's creeping over Jack Benny.
Jack Benny, probably hilarious at the time, but I just think everything he's doing now is like offensive. Like, the main joke in the show is like, oh, he slept with every woman. And like, whenever they mention it to him, like, oh, didn't we meet in this town? Like, I got to get out of here. Like, that's the joke, that you slept with these women and then ditched them. Yeah, I think he does it with Bessie Love. He does it with like everybody. I want to talk about real quick my favorite part of this. Again, people's mileage may vary, and I'll play a little bit of this for you, Rob, while we do this. The Adagio dance with the Natova Company. This dance I thought was fantastic, and it was like, there's some of the moves that she does in it are just absolutely like sitting in my seat, like they're going to kill her, like with some of the maneuvers. So I wanted to look up about her, and there's nothing like on the Wikipedia. Like, they don't talk about it. Jack Benny makes a bunch of like snide jokes about her. Like, oh, I'll be meeting her at the hotel afterwards. But I think this is a really interesting dance. I looked a little bit into this girl. Her name was Natasha Natova. She came to Paris from war-torn Russia and became one of Europe and America's most daring and graceful adagio dancers during the Jazz Age. Adagio is it's like slow and folding movements in ballet performed with great amount of fluidity and grace, which is kind of what we see her doing here. She was in control of her entire show. She did all the costumes. She did all the choreography. She's like 25 in this when she's doing this. And she was brought to New York, Greenwich Village, did a really popular show. It went to Chicago, and she ended up taking it to California, which theoretically, what I read from one of her fan pages, theoretically, they just saw her show and were like, hey, let's just throw this in the Hollywood Review at the last minute, you know? And it's funny because it's actually someone with talent at the talent show. And I just felt like, you know, people are going to talk about Laurel and Hardy and all this other stuff that's like not that great. But like this girl who's like forgotten to history and just got thrown into a movie that was nominated for an Oscar did some like amazing acrobatic dancing that like I just thought was stunning. She was a fiery, fought with a lot of people, had a lot of accidents on the stage, as you can imagine, doing those type of maneuvers. I think she was knocked unconscious once where they dropped her straight on her face. So, I mean, there's real danger in that. And I really appreciate it. And I just wanted to highlight it while we're doing it, because afterwards I'm like, I have to look this girl up. And then, you know, when you start looking them up and you're like, I can't find anything on Wikipedia, you start to be like more mad and like, I'm going to find more about this person.
Right.
Great. To me, that was the standout part. Take out Jack Benny's crappy commentary over it.
I had one of the weirdest, I think this is going to be strange, a bit that jumped out to me as remarkable was, in fact, the intermission where we are just watching the orchestra play in, you know, medium long shots. Camera does not move. It is just, okay, here's some interstitial music. At that moment, more than anything else, I was struck by how this film might be like a 1929, 1930 equivalent to virtual reality.
I see where you're going with this.
Right. So it is like, okay, you know, we are celebrating the technology. You know, how immersive can cinema be? And how immersive can sound cinema be? And even though there's no camera movement, it's not dynamic in any way. It is dropping you as a viewer into the spectator position of somebody who is in the theater watching this, again, high school talent show. I don't know, a proof of concept of the technology that it could immerse you in some sort of live performance experience. That interested me, perhaps more than any of the actual numbers.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea, but it's just, as a movie for Best Picture, it's
sure. These are the things that we hook into in order to endure this exercise that you have roped me into, and that you have roped yourself into for at the rate we're going. 10 years, maybe.
Cyrus thought 17. I feel like it'll be less than that. I think 10's closer to reality. It'll probably be one a month. I don't know. Someone at home, do the. Where's my fan? I can't look into the camera. Fan, find out how many years we're going to be doing this and put in one of those creepy emails. Okay, Rob, let's move to the next movie. I know you're chomping at the bit to talk about Alibi, right?
Penny, I have so little to say about Alibi. Again, I don't want to turn this into a Mystery Science Theater 3000 thing. You know, it's important that you and I try to contextualize these films and look at what is positive about them.
Yeah.
And Alibi does have some moments, but I found it to be the least remarkable of all of these.
Oh, wow. Less remarkable than Hollywood Review of 1929?
Yes. Not necessarily worse than the Hollywood Review. There's just nothing going on. You know, what were some of your...
Let me give you a couple
finer point thoughts about Alibi.
All right, I got a few. 1929, in the last Oscars, me and Cyrus had to watch a movie called The Racket, which was it's interesting that 2 Academy Awards in a row they're putting these pre-code kind of crime gangster movies. This movie, Alibi, I think was better. I'll say this first, was better than The Racket. I didn't like The Racket one bit. Alibi, and that's not to say that I think the Alibi is fantastic. It's just better than The Racket, which is not saying much. Alibi, just for you folks at home, courtesy of our friends at Wikipedia. I hope we're all donating to Wikipedia. I know they're periodically looking for money. Joan Manning The daughter of a police sergeant secretly marries Chick Williams, a gang leader who convinces her that he is leading an honest life. Chick attends the theater with Joan and at the intermission sneaks away, committing a robbery during which a policeman is killed. Chick is suspected of the crime, but is able to use Joan to substantiate his alibi. The police plant Danny McGann, an undercover agent in Chick's gang, and he's so convincing as a drunk, Chick McGann. We can talk about him in a minute. But they figure it out that he is an undercover agent and they murder him. Chick is later cornered by the police in his own home. Before they can arrest him, he flips the light switch, plunging the room into darkness. In the midst of the chaos, Chick escapes to the roof. He jumps to a nearby building, but stumbles on the landing, falling to his death. Chester Morris, playing Chick Williams, was nominated for Best Actor in this movie. And this movie also got an art direction nomination for William Cameron Menzies. Let's talk about that death scene, that undercover agent 10-minute death scene. Do you remember this?
I sure do.
Fellas, I'm dying. Like, I feel like that's been lampooned so many times that maybe nobody knows this is where it starts. Like, this is the guy who just won't die, he's dying.
Right.
He's got a few more things to say, but Chief.
I mean, is Tim Roth drawing from this performance in Reservoir Dogs? I think that's worth pursuing.
I think there might be some truth in that. I think
possibly, because they're very similar performances. No, that was agonizing. Not nearly as agonizing, though, and not nearly as funny to me as the way that Chick, when he is being held up by the police officer, I forget the character's name, going to avenge his fallen fellow officer's death. I'm going to shoot you in the back. When you turn your back, that's when you will die. So you better not turn your back. I hope to never be confronted with this kind of threat. But if the way that I save myself is just by never turning my back on the gun, it was so utterly preposterous.
Who are you rooting for in this movie? The police are horrible. They're corrupt, ruthlessly interrogating that one guy in the office where they're like, "We're gonna kill you." They're basically threatening to kill him if he doesn't just cough up Chick. And then, like, at the end, that sequence. And then you got Chick, who I thought at the beginning, I'm like, well, maybe this guy is innocent, and that's going to be an interesting thread. And it's like, now by mid-film, you're just like, nah, this guy's a scumbag. Don't root for him. Which, speaking of, we talk about best performances. I thought he had presence of all the actors in this movie, the actor playing Chick, but that's not an Academy Award performance.
No. Yeah, you're right. He does have some star power. Yeah. You can see how somebody would watch Alibi and see his performance and maybe say, with a better script and better direction, you could draw something special out of him. He looks the part. He looks like a classical Hollywood star. When the film started, and this is coming off of the Broadway Melody, which I knew I did not like when it ended, and like, okay, we're moving into a genre that I care for a little bit more. There's a skews dark, literally as well. You get some of the chiaroscuro lighting, that we associate with films noir, that will carry through into the film noir heyday of the 40s. There is some attempt to use the medium, and particularly some of the more mature elements of silent cinema, cross-cutting, like the use of the watch, that we were playing with time through editing and cross-cutting. Then the film just became uninteresting.
That art direction too, as much as I do appreciate like the German expressionism, I love Murnau, last Oscars, and we're talking about, wait, which one had some of that for this? Oh, The Patriot we were talking about had
Patriot has a little bit.
Yeah. But I felt like this felt very still like amateur, almost like a copy. Like this was like someone who liked Murnau a lot and was just like, I'm just going to try and do some of the same things, but without the deeper layers of meaning, or without like any, it's just kind of cut and paste. Like, oh, I see what he does. I like it. I'm doing it, but it doesn't have any depth or meaning. Like, okay, it looks interesting. This movie's not good though.
Right. Before I realized that I really disliked Alibi, and as I was just kind of weighing it against the Broadway Melody. These were the two first films I saw. To what extent should I ascribe greater value to a film like Alibi because it aesthetically does things that I care about? Mm-hmm. I care about the setting of mood through mise-en-scène and cinematography, and that's not something that the Broadway Melody cares about. Is it fine for me to take my own personal taste and sensibilities that I've acquired and bits of cinema history that have survived into 2023 in interesting ways and say, because of that, Alibi is a better film than the Broadway Melody? I batted that question around a little bit at first, and then I stopped batting that question around.
I could see why, you might want to rank this higher than the other ones just for those reasons. But it's just, the story, the direction. I want to mention the director, Roland West. Is he nominated for anything? No. Roland West, American film director known for his innovative proto-film noir movies of the 20s and 30s. He's best known for possibly murdering a Hollywood actress, Thelma Todd, in 1935. I actually watched a documentary on that murder a couple of days ago, on that supposed murder, a YouTube documentary, where he was in like some weird three-way relation. Him and his wife were dating this woman, Thelma, and she was living like at a house that they paid for above a bar that they were all partners on. And it sounded like you could draw some conclusions that he had something to do with her death for sure. And I'm just thinking, of course he did. This kind of, the reason I like auteur directors is because you're getting Werner Herzog's, like, this is the inside of his brain, and you're relating to this is like, these are his dreams, his fears, and good auteur, good directors, you're getting that. Alibi, I'm getting a killer's like just dark, stupid fantasy. Like, it's just, this is if Patrick Bateman directed a movie. He's making like Alibi.
Queued it up a little bit earlier that the city of Chicago was also not a fan of Alibi, in that it banned Alibi for criminality, immorality, and depravity. I imagine that somewhere the specter of Al Capone hovered over the city of Chicago's decision to ban Alibi.
Oh, for sure. I think The Racket was actually banned by the city of Chicago. I think if you're doing a gangster movie, Chicago was just like, nope, nothing to do with us. Like, look somewhere else. We're not showing that movie in our city. Alibi's a better movie than The Racket. Alibi is not a good movie. Take what you. Let's move to the last one. All right, In Old Arizona is a 1928 American pre-code Western. The film, which was based on the character of the Cisco Kid in the 1907 story The Caballero's Way by O. Henry, was a major innovation in Hollywood. It was the first major Western to use the new technology of sound and the first talkie to be filmed outdoors. It made extensive use of authentic locations, and here's what it was about. In Arizona, a bandit known as the Cisco Kid robs a stagecoach. Word of his deed reaches Sergeant Mickey Dunn, who's tasked by his superior to bring in the Cisco Kid, dead or alive, with a $5,000 reward promised if he does. The Cisco Kid is in a relationship with Tanya Maria and visits her often. He loves her, but she has frequent affairs without his knowledge. Dunn and Maria meet. This is the sergeant, and they have an affair. Dunn tells Maria that he'll give her all the money when they capture or kill the Cisco Kid. So she decides to betray him. She writes a secret letter to Dunn telling him to come that evening to take down the Cisco Kid. The Cisco Kid intercepts that letter and changes it, saying that he will be dressed up in Maria's clothes and Maria will be dressed as the Cisco Kid. Dunn gets the letter, thinks Maria wrote it, shoots Maria, just sees a woman at the door and shoots her. And Cisco Kid gets away. Okay, Rob, I know you have a lot of thoughts. Where do you want to start with this movie?
I think that this is narratively and visually the most coherent and sophisticated of the films that we've watched. Knowing that it is the first sound film to do location and outdoor sound, synchronous sound, it has a more, a larger obstacle against it than something like the Broadway Melody. And I think it surpasses that obstacle more successfully. There is not any point where it just seemed the most technically polished. I thought the narrative actually was, it's familiar. It's, it's familiar Western. Bad man comes into town, and the lawman is tasked with taking him down. But there's some complexity there. I started this thinking that the Cisco Kid was going to be the villain and that Dunn was going to be the protagonist of the film, who we would root for. And it happens fairly subtly, where you realize actually he's the more morally corrupt and selfish and just kind of icky figure. And the Cisco Kid is, and it's portrayed by Warner Baxter, who ends up winning Best Actor. What did you think about it in terms of plot and construction?
No, I agree with you. I think we're based on like what I'm guessing is a successful story. O. Henry is a well-known author, and the Cisco Kid's a character. So you're kind of starting with actual good material. This has been tried and tested. I don't know how close this hedges to the story it's based on. I don't know if they took a lot
established
of
IP.
Yeah, it's established IP. Yeah, so okay, we're off on good footing. It was well directed compared to, like, I have criticisms of the Hollywood Review, being a tripod on a camera. I have criticisms of Alibi feeling like this passionless, just trying to look interesting recording. I thought Broadway Melody was kind of like, you don't walk away from that thinking, you actually think they failed some of the musical performances in it. Whereas I feel this movie feels, like you said, it's like a kind of complete, like this is a strong movie. And I also would say Warner Baxter, who won Best Actor, did a ton more than the actor in Alibi. Warner Baxter had like a charisma as a Cisco Kid, and like
he's funny and charming.
Funny and charming. Exactly. I think that this starts to lead us into the all right, so he's doing an accent, first of all. And it's an accent that I've read kind of started this whole people talking this way in playing, I guess, Mexican characters or Latino Mexican characters. Tanya Maria, I had a little bit more, like, I felt like a little bit more uneasy with her performance than probably Warner Baxter's.
I agree. Yeah, she's cartoonish and in such overly sexualized and promiscuous, and there seems to be an anti-ethnic component to that.
Yeah, I felt like it was cartoonish. I felt like she was over the top, and the accent felt not authentic to me. It felt like, it felt like someone with a script just really going ham, going to town with it.
It teetered on a white actress doing an impression of Rosie Perez in White Man Can't Jump.
Again, I don't know this history. Like we talked about with the jazz singer, obviously blackface is terrible. I did not like the movie because of it. I found it offensive watching it, and I never want to see it again. This movie, it has some cultural appropriation, and we have cultural invention, maybe. I don't know. Are they like, is this thing that Werner Baxter's doing as Cisco Kid, is this like, did he learn this somewhere? Is he like being coached? I'm wondering, or did he just like kind of,
or is it a simulacrum? Is this an idea of like the Mexican bandit that never actually existed? Is it a caricature? Is it a caricature without historical, legitimate historical reference points? I don't know either.
Well, I didn't feel necessarily offended. I felt like a little uneasy about it, like watching it. Like, I don't know what I should be thinking about this.
Right. I think where this differs from the jazz singer is blackface is actually narratively significant in the jazz singer. The wearing of blackface is important, and in some ways important in a very positive way. It is like an important means for him to unlock doors for himself within the jazz milieu. And that's really gross.
Mm-hmm.
This is also really gross. It is a really gross practice that Hollywood has been embarking in one way or another since its inception, and continues to. Not necessarily white actors wearing brownface, but white actors being cast in non-white roles. John Turturro, Italian actor, plays, The Big Lebowski is not my favorite film, but I'm going to reference it for the second time, but plays the Jesus, who is absolutely a Latino character. We have this in other films as well. Plenty of other films that, the casting of white performers in non-white roles. And there have been, proper rebellions against that within the industry and among fans. This is all very slippery slope, trying to compare the two and say one is worse than the other. But I agree with you that I wasn't offended in the same way as I was with the Jazz Singer.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, though, this leads that slope to there's a lot of probably bad movies that were absolutely offensive that came out of this movie, where they were parroting what was done here. And
sure,
because I know in the future, having watched a lot of Westerns from my dad having them on television when I was a kid, that you're going to see a lot of white actors wearing yellow face or dressed as, just offensive, clearly offensive Native Americans.
Yes, right.
And that lineage kind of feels like right around here is where we're starting that up now, and it's going to lead to some bad stuff. And, even the Mickey Dunn guy kind of felt like a proto John Wayne kind of type of character.
Well, and Raoul Walsh is credited with discovering John Wayne.
Oh, wow. I didn't read that.
Yeah. Yep. Looking up the directors of these films, kind of as you did, to see who actually had a remarkable career. And I think ultimately we were stress testing the idea of, did anybody have a remarkable career besides Ernst Lubitsch?
Yeah.
And Raoul Walsh comes closest. Discovers John Wayne. He ends up directing, and I don't have the list of films in front of me, but he directs James Cagney. He directs Humphrey Bogart at some point in his career. Clark Gable. He is, actually has a career that endures, not in the same way as Lubitsch, but.
Well, here's actually what's funny on this movie. Interesting tidbit is this movie has two listed directors, because as Raoul Walsh and Irving Cummings, who ended up being nominated for Best Director for this movie, because Raoul Walsh was set to direct and star in this movie. According to this Wikipedia article, he had to abandon the project when a jackrabbit jumped through the windshield of a vehicle he was driving,
right,
resulting in him losing an eye. He never acted again, but continued his successful career as a film director. So he ended up not even getting to finish direct. He probably did some preliminary work when the accident happened. And then this guy, Irving Cummings, who finished the movie, or, again, who knows the percentages, he went on to direct. He was best known for his musicals, many of which featured Betty Grable or Shirley Temple, which is kind of interesting because that's totally not this movie. Well, let me go back. Let me backtrack for a second while you're looking that up to Werner Baxter. American film actor from the 1910s to the 40s. He frequently played womanizing, charismatic Latin bandit types in Westerns and played the Cisco Kid or a similar character throughout the 1930s, but did have a range of other roles throughout his career. And I've seen pictures of him not in the makeup, and he is just a white dude, to put it bluntly. We don't know the genesis of this, how he comes up with this. Is he basing on something beforehand? I'm not fluid enough in cinema at this time in the Western genre to say, but I can say again, while this wasn't necessarily as offensive as something like Jazz Singer, I could totally see this being the seed that turns into a horrible thread in future Hollywood.
I don't know. To me, it's just evidence. It is evidence of a far more pervasive problem within Hollywood, pervasive and persistent. I've wrestled with that a lot. How far I would take what I'm sure anybody who is listening to this still, at least you're one fan, can obviously tell that I feel far more favorable about this film than any of the others that we saw the entire thing. But It has this one thing. It's serious.
Yeah, we have a tough choice with these movies. They all have something that kind of stops it from being elevated to great, and more of them have things that elevate them towards please mind wipe me.
Kenny, maybe there's one thing, again, I know this is kind of maybe preempting some of the drama behind the Golden Boy reveal, but we derisively talked about what a bad collection of films this is.
Let me start giving you some Golden Boy some of the lists. Number 5 is the Hollywood Review of 1929. I just cannot pick a variety show, a high school variety show, as Best Picture in good conscience at all.
But so you're including The Patriot in here?
I'm including The Patriot in these 5 movies. So before Hollywood Review, The Patriot, I would pick The Patriot. Number 4 on my list is going to be the Broadway Melody. I cannot pick this movie, despite Hank, the character Bessie Love, absolutely fantastic as in one character in the movie. But just thematically, the fact that these filmmakers wanted this horrible thing to happen, I can't back this movie. I would say, and Alibi is my 3rd. My 2 top picks for the possible winner for a Golden Boy in the 2nd Academy Awards are In Old Arizona and The Patriot. These are the 2 vying for the spot. Whichever one I pick, I will make a case for when I do. Give me your 5, starting with number 5.
I felt incapable of saying I'm going to insert this film that I've only seen 3 minutes of, much of which are stills of, floating heads with their names over them and subtitles or captions telling me why these people were stars. I did not rank it. I am going to try to play out that intellectual exercise. I would agree with you that the Hollywood Review is 5. It's just maybe I am projecting my own belief on what should be nominated for an Academy Award Best Picture in the first place. But a variety show is not something that I would do that for. And in fact, the Emmys, they have an award reserved for variety shows. Number 4 for me is Alibi. I just thought it was an atrocity. Outside of the first 10 minutes, I just thought it was an absolutely miserable watch. And so here is where I get to the point where I am stymied by this insertion of The Patriot. I was, without The Patriot in there, would be me choosing between Broadway Melody and In Old Arizona.
All right, before we get our Golden Boy awards out, what I've been also doing as I go through these is I've made like a master list. So like for the Golden Boys I did with Cyrus. So this kind of is what helped me with thinking about my rankings a little bit. So for the first Academy Awards, there were only 4 movies that I thought had any merit, which I would love if we could say 4 movies had merit from this one. And it was like, I thought The Crowd, clear number 1. I thought The Circus by Charlie Chaplin was like number 2, Sunrise by Murnau, and the 4th one was Wings by William Wellman. I thought those 4 movies were all interesting. And again, they fit my internal criteria of like, these are directors that I think are worth it. Everything else was like, there was a hard line that's like, these are all terrible.
Right.
So I'm looking at this Oscars we're doing and I'm trying to fit them in there. And I'm like, well, where are these compared to what I watched there? And I'm like, any of those top 4 from that first Oscar, they would have won this one. If it were Wings in this one, oh yeah, Wings is hands down going to win this one. If it were, Chaplin. And like we said, there's a lot of movies that were not in this that came out that year that were great. And I think The Cameraman by Buster Keaton would have been interesting to watch. 1, 2.
Right.
So I'm ranking them all in there and they're all coming below that line of demarcation. And I'm thinking, well, where is The Patriot going to go in this? Do I just put it at the bottom of the list as the lost movie? And then I was like, you know what? I'm going to make this the line of demarcation, like the middle line between what's recommended and what's not recommended. And the minute I put it there, it kind of started to clarify some things on the way I was thinking. All right. In the 2nd Academy Awards from 1930, as Rob has dubbed it, the Schrodinger's cat Academy Awards, the only one, the lost movie. People, I don't care about the hate. I don't care about the hate. Rob, who's got that Golden Boy?
Oh, okay, the blur. I'm going in Old Arizona.
And the 2nd ever Golden Boy for Best Picture goes to 2 films in split decision. In Old Arizona by Raoul Walsh and Irving Cummings. And The Patriot by Ernst Lubitsch. You were wrong again, Louis B. The Broadway Melody is a toilet movie. I know it's a cop-out. I would totally, if I didn't pick The Patriot, I would be picking In Old Arizona. And that was the battle in the back of my mind this entire time. How do I pick a movie I didn't watch? I always get mad, like, if you were like, Babylon's just the worst movie ever. You watch an hour of it, I'd be like, oh, you got to finish the movie and then tell me that it's the worst movie ever.
Yeah, sure.
Now I've seen 3 minutes of The Patriot, and it wasn't in order. It was cut up in a trailer of the movie. But none of the other movies were like in that. Even In Old Arizona wasn't in that. Like I'm going to recommend this movie to people. Like we're not going to hang out at a restaurant and I'm going to make Rob watch The Crowd and In Old Arizona, like back to back. It's a dynamite double feature. I would say, which I feel like you probably would say, is In Old Arizona was the best of the worst. I'm going off of, we got Ernst Lubitsch, a guy who's going to show up at other Academy Awards. He's a famous enough director that other directors appreciate him. He is spoken about as having the Lubitsch touch. He has kind of like this Alfred Hitchcock kind of appeal about him. The clips that we did see seemed like the art direction had this kind of, this kind of German expressionism, a lot of heavy shadows. I feel like, and we talked about this beforehand, it was being silent. The silent movies almost were at the peak of their form at this point. Like they're making a lot of challenging, excellent movies. They've mastered what they're capable of, sound through the monkey wrench. And so I want to say that if they found The Patriot, I would watch it and I would probably enjoy it. Would it rank in the top 4? I don't know. That's my rationale.
Right. I'm halfway there with you. Really am. And there's like an element of lifetime achievement award to it as well. I don't know what films Lubitsch's other Oscar-nominated films were up against, and whether you would give those the nod over his competition. The Departed is by no stretch my favorite Scorsese film. It's fine.
Yeah.
But, I think that the Academy was righting a long-running wrong of not giving Scorsese Best Picture at some point, a Scorsese film Best Picture at some point. I get the instinct. I just didn't see the film. It can be garbage. It can be absolute garbage. And I cannot ignore that fact. Again, it's the Schrodinger's cat movie. It could be brimming with life and it could be dead on the inside. And I am not flying to Los Angeles to find out if the 1/3 lives up to even the potential that is suggested by the trailer. In Old Arizona is kind of, to me, like when Green Book wins the year after Moonlight, or when Coda wins the year after Parasite. It is an insignificant film that does not rate in history, sits below that line of demarcation from the previous Academy Awards.
Yeah,
but it is better than the rest, and there's actual. Again, there's some actual polish to it and a story that I cared to follow at all.
I'm glad we went this way, Rob, because I feel like, well, first of all, if we both picked The Patriot, I think they'd be burning the show down in the ground and be like, oh, you're both picking a movie that doesn't exist. Like, I feel like the pitchforks are going to come out about that. I do think I 100% agree with you. In Old Arizona was an actual movie like that. It's a movie. Those other ones were not movies to me. The other thing that weighed me towards The Patriot was the feeling that Louis B. Mayer put his thumb on the Broadway Melody and probably was like, yeah, that silent movie's not going to win. We're in the sound era. It's a second Academy Awards.
Right.
Politically, a silent film shouldn't be winning Best Picture. Again, I'm rationalizing this way too much because I have to. But
no, I mean, I think that to your point of this being a positive outcome in our our disagreement, it does. Perhaps it is a philosophical quandary that will hover over future Golden Boy installments of, we're having this is a real challenge to define value. What we find historically valuable or what we find aesthetically valuable, and how we project our own understandings of, where Lubitsch goes in his career. And, our understanding of silent film being sophisticated at the same time that sound film was not at this specific historical moment. I think that the challenge here or the challenge in our disagreement here will, it sets some interesting precedents for how we will evaluate, especially these older movies going forward.
It's in a Schrodinger's cat way. I agree with your pick, but I also don't agree with your pick. And I agree with my pick, but I also don't agree with my pick, because at the back of my mind, I'm like, Kenny, you coward, you picked the Lost movie. What a cop out.
Right. And, conversely, I picked a film that I understood to be bad, or mediocre.
But what if they find The Patriot and it's just full of blackface? Like that whole movie that's not in the trailer is just this, and then I'm like, I picked that best film. That's on me because I picked the Lost movie. Okay.
When we get some sponsors, we can all take a field trip to the UCLA Film Archives and see if we can suss out a little bit more.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Holler, Venmo me.
Guys, Venmo us if you want me and Rob to do a road trip to see one or two reels of I think 12 reels of The Patriot. Rob, this was awesome. I'm glad that you were available to do this.
Thank you for having me. This was fun. This was good. I think it is. I think that you and I probably, outside of, I'm sure there are going to be some other awful Academy Award years that have 10 films.
Yeah.
But we did some yeoman's work this time around.
This one was a tough one. I think having a Lost movie, having 4 not so great ones at the beginning of the sound era. This was a tough Academy Awards, and this might actually end up being one of the worst Academy Awards. Probably. Right?
We'll see. Yeah, but I would not be surprised.
It is, because I don't want to keep doing this if they're all this bad. Rob, this is awesome. We're definitely going to have Rob back on here's expertise.
I'm excited to see where Golden Boy goes from here, and to be a part of it. I appreciate it.
Do you have any last minute Golden Boy slogans we can add to the wall off the top of your head? No pressure.
Yes. I don't want to watch these movies anymore. Again.
Golden Boy episode 2. We don't want to watch these. Where's my camera?
I don't want to watch these movies again.
We don't want to watch these movies again. But we do. So if those of you watching at home that are about to run home and watch these, you can skip them. Skip to episode 3 after this.
Right.
All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kenny.
We'll
see you soon.
In Golden Boy number 3. Hey, everyone. That was it. Episode 2 of Golden Boy. Thanks for watching. It's a day late. This is a one-time only thing. We had some last-minute things that kind of slowed down the editing here. Hank kind of got in the way, chewed through some cables. Next episode 3 of Golden Boy, we will be reviewing 5 different movies. So I wanted to kind of give you guys a heads up so you could do a little bit of homework and be ready for September 1st when we do that. So here are the movies we're going to be watching next episode. Disraeli by Alfred E. Green. The Love Parade by Ernst Lubitsch. The Big House by George Hill. The Divorcee by Robert Z. Leonard. All Quiet on the Western Front by Louis Milestone. Very interesting that we get to finally see an Ernst Lubitsch movie next week, and I can find out if I made a horrible, horrible mistake. All right, I'll see you all then, August 1, with a new special guest. Thanks for watching Golden Boy. Dear Mr. and Miss Everyone, Kenny and Rob has had the 2nd Academy Awards erased from their memory. Please never mention their relationship to early 1930s nominees again. Thank you. Lacuna Inc., 210 East Grand Street, New York, New York, 10019.